Yep, you read the title right. As of September 2024, every single high round record on Black Ops 3 is literally impossible to beat. They've all reached the maximum round that can be achieved on the game, 255, at which point the round starts infinitely repeating and the progression of the game stops. While on maps like Revelations, Ascension, and the Giant, 255 was reached early in the game's life cycle, you have to wonder, why did some, like Shangri-La, take so long? The last three maps to reach 255 on Black Ops 3 were Verrucht, Shi-No-Numa, and Shangri-La, in that order. All of these were achieved by an American player named Snipercat. For Verrucht and Shi-No, I'd chalk their lateness to the 255 party up to a couple pretty simple reasons. They are very hard maps to survive on, and because of that, they were very underplayed. These two maps, along with Noct, are the only maps on Black Ops 3 without Pack-a-Punch, so that rules out the use of alternate ammo types. You could argue that the only reasons that Noct's 255 was achieved first, despite the fact that it's the slowest map on BO3 by far, is that A, it has the Thunder Gun, and B, the craziness of the achievement itself was enough to encourage one player, Tom Fantasy, to go for it. On Verrucht and Shi-No, the lack of Pack-a-Punch forces the player to use traps. The only safety you have is from the Wunderwaffe, which can only kill 10 zombies at a time, and has a delay between when you shoot it and when it actually kills them, so it's pretty unreliable. The strategies are also very slow. It took Snipercat over 100 hours on both maps to reach 255. The second longest map to reach 255 in terms of days between release and max round was Gorod Krovi, but this was mostly because of a mysterious error that no one knew the cause of until some pretty intensive testing. But Shangri-La is a different beast entirely, because it has a different problem. See, while Verrucht and Shi-No are both slow, they have very high resets when the map will restart itself. Snipercat was not even really close to hitting these, and he had a lot of buffer time where he could have messed up or taken his time and played safer if he wanted to. But reset has long been a problem on Shang. Shang's reset is only about 74 hours, and while the strategy is faster than either Verrucht or Shi-No, because on this map you do have AATs, it just wasn't fast enough, until now. But to understand the long, treacherous road to 255, we have to step back a bit, to when Shang first got rolling. When Shang first came out with Zombies Chronicles on May 26, 2017, players didn't know what strategy to do. The brutally tight map layout didn't translate well to Black Ops 3, where zombies bounce off each other and swipe fast when you run past them. People finally landed on an old strategy from the very early days of Shangri-La and Black Ops 1, where you could hoard up by running a loop around what was dubbed as the minecart room. On Black Ops 3, instead of using the baby gun and Sallies to kill, you could just use AATs, alternate ammo types. The first few world records did exactly that, using deadwire and fireworks to kill all the zombies of the horde at once, and keeping the wonder weapon, the baby gun, only for safety. By the end of that 2017 summer, the record was 150 by Spanish player Mr. Carroro. A year after that, it had only raised to 156 by American player Irakamup. The minecart strategy did work, but it took around 30 seconds to kill a single horde of 24 zombies. That meant you wouldn't even be able to get 200 before you reset with this strategy. But nothing consistent besides this was put into practice on Shang for another year, until the record progression started getting weird. A few months before Irakamup's 156, a Black Ops 3 player named Cynicus claimed he had reached 203 on the map and was intentionally hiding the gameplay. Instead, he tweeted this cryptic riddle about his strategy. 6 years later, our top zombies codebreakers are still trying to figure it out. KN44 be damned. A year after Irakamup's 156, something similar happened again. A player named Woodside62 randomly tweeted this screenshot saying he had rage quit a 195 game after downing twice to a bug. The problem? Woodside had no gameplay to prove he had actually played legit, and he was standing in a different area of the map from everyone else, bringing a lot of questions about what on earth he'd done to beat the record by so much, especially since no one knew for sure what the reset time on Shang was yet. And apparently, Woodside had no intention of showing anyone, because no gameplay of this game ever came to light. What you're looking at is the only hint that it was ever played. This stirred up some controversy among the Black Ops 3 community. Was the record record really supposed to be this hidden game? Luckily, one man was determined to clear it all up. The first reset on Shang was achieved by KXG124, or Keg, in September 2019 in a round 205 game, achieving the first 200 on the map. But Keg himself described his gameplay in this game as mediocre at best, which is understandable because he used a completely different strategy, one that was invented shortly after the map came out by famous high round strategist 5 and 5. This involved running circles in the Kuda room, where the water slide lets out, and keeping the big wooden door to the next room closed. Keg did not buy Mule Kick and instead used the Kuda with Deadwire only to kill the zombies, meaning he could kill handfuls of zombies every few seconds instead of waiting for the entire horde, lowering the total seconds per horde of this strategy down to 23. He only used the baby gun for safety, but unfortunately, it sucks on this game. Because of bouncy Black Ops 3 zombie hitboxes, it's very unreliable, which just makes this map even harder. It is very useful for shrinking napalm zombies and shrieker zombies to easily kill them, but after 170 they become insta-kill anyway. Instead of using alchemical antithesis to spam the wonder weapon every few rounds like other maps, Keg just cycled for safety guns like In Plain Sight and Anywhere But Here to keep himself alive. He would still end up beating the record by almost 50 rounds, mostly due to the sheer increase in speed, but it wasn't even close to the speed needed for 255. In terms of zombie count, 200 is only about halfway to 255, which means someone would need to be twice as fast as Keg to max out the map. This made Shang still the farthest map from achieving 255 at this point, and it looked like the journey was only going to get harder, way harder. But since Keg had mostly been playing for survival in the first reset, players realized that there was a lot of potential for improvement on his record, but they'd have to run it a little differently if they wanted to speed things up. The first optimization that was brought up was leaving the opposite door closed, the tunnel door instead of the Kuda door. This meant you wouldn't have to wait for the slow animation of the ceiling spawners in the tunnel, which sped up the strategy slightly, but it also just made the Kuda room much easier to run hordes in, because through the Kuda door, the zombies entered the room into much more open space. Players also recognized that Keg had been pretty sparing with his Deadwire shooting. He only shot once per circle around the room, and once players started shooting multiple times per rotation, even with only using Deadwire, the strategy started speeding up a lot. By 2020, there were two players giving Keg a run for his money, Norwegian player H. Mortveit and French player Reviverz. The two of them were locked in a race to 200, and to Keg's record, with the new strategy. But something slowed this race down a lot. Restarts. Well, and deaths. But the restarts on Shang were proving to be some of the most brutal of any map. See, in the early game, on a lot of maps where luck is a factor, zombies players will just restart if they don't get a good setup. The problem was that there were a lot of luck-based factors that went into just starting the map. First of all, you wanted baby gun out of the first box, so before it moved, to prevent fire sales from spawning both on the map and in the drop flip cycle while a monkey was carrying it. So if you didn't get the baby gun before your first teddy bear, that's a restart. Next up was the Pack-a-Punch stone. On Shang, Pack-a-Punch is at the top of the temple steps, which are lowered by standing on a pressure plate that spawns randomly at one of 4 locations in a solo game. The problem? One of these locations is in the tunnel that you have to leave closed with the new strategy. So if the Pack-a-Punch stone spawns in the tunnel, that's a restart, even if you got the baby gun first box. Mort and Reviverz also left the minecart room closed so that monkeys could not drop down from spawn through the geyser into the Kuda room to take your drops. Instead, the monkey would have to run around the entire map, and by the time they got to the Kuda room, the drop would be gone already, and the monkey would not target the player. But if Juggernog was in that room instead of Speed Cola, that's a restart. Players would also avoid flipping perks altogether so as not to get Widow's Wine, which is a rather problematic perk for high rounds. Not only does it screw up hoarding by freezing certain zombies that hit you and forcing you to waste baby gun shots, it can also make you error eventually from its grenades exploding. So players avoided it like the plague, instead choosing to run a base 4 perks of Juggernog, Quick Revive, Stamina Up, and Double Tap for better Deadwire procs. And then you had to worry about, well, not dying. Mortveit and Reviverz were neck and neck for a while, with Mort almost scraping Keg's record with a 191 in June of 2020. Sadly, Mort's revives would eventually dry up and he would end up dying to a quadruple slap. Reviverz would have much better luck a month later, as he sped past Keg's 205 nearly 30 hours faster with the new strategy, and it seemed like he was on pace to trailblaze all the way to 240 before hitting reset. But he ran into an unexpected PC problem. Everything was going fine until round 226 when Reviverz game randomly dropped from a 150 FPS average to a 25 FPS average due to a rare performance bug. This made the game much harder and slower to play, and no matter what he tried, he couldn't fix it without restarting the game. He managed to play about 2 more hours like this to 228, but at this point he couldn't avoid downing, and he finally rage quit the game. But despite the fact that this game had ended 10 hours before reset, Reviverz 228 would stand as the record for the whole next year, because that's about how long it took the next player grinding to beat it. This was Brazilian player JadeWestLover, or JWL. JWL could have done the same strategy as Reviverz and Mort and outlasted either of them, and probably easily beaten the record, but he wanted to push the map farther than that strategy would have gone. So he used the new meta emerging for Shang, 2 AATs, Deadwire and Turned, instead of Deadwire only, but this made the restarts even worse. In fact, it made them some of the worst in Zombies history, because not only did JWL have to restart for Juggernaut in Minecart Room, and then First Box Baby Gun, and then for Pack-a-Punch Stone Not in Tunnel, he then restarted to get every perk except Widow's Wine, with Meal Kick of particular importance because he needed 3 guns. This meant it could take literal days of restarting before you could get a single viable Shang game set up. Then, in addition to all that, if JWL took an early down, even after setting up, he would restart anyway so as not to waste an early quick revive. Plus, since his turned gun was his Meal Kick weapon, a down would make him lose it, and there was a good chance that the Pack-a-Punch Stone would move to Tunnel before he could get turned back on the gun. So with these giant roadblocks, it was no surprise it took him 10 months to get a game going that would give Reviverz 228 a run for its money. But in September of 2021, the planets finally aligned for JWL, and he got into a solid game with all his requirements met. Juggernaut open, Baby Gun, Papstone, and no Widows. He played a somewhat fast version of the strategy until about round 140, where he would run the Cuda room in a U shape, cutting back at each end to fold the horde in on itself and shoot Deadwire, picking up more kills with the zombies grouped together. After 140, he used safety over speed, running the room in a full circle and shooting behind him when he reached the geyser on each loop, pulling out the Baby Gun to shoot if he needed at the choke points. And it worked. JWL passed Reviver's record about 4 hours faster, and made it all the way to 243 when he hit reset. Like the record holders before him, JWL did not make much use of alchemical antithesis, and instead cycled safety guns to keep himself alive. He ended up staying flawless with no downs for the entire game, but that didn't mean he didn't have some close calls along the way, still showing the sheer difficulty of the strategy, especially when killing so fast. And with more speed, it'd only get harder. But JWL's record didn't have much competition for the next 2 years, because hardly anyone wanted to put themselves through the restarts required to even get a game started. Players like Keg, Riot, Affirmed Pilot, and Vackle attempted to sharpen their skills at Shang both in Strat Tester and in real restarts, but the same inhibitors that had kept JWL from getting a game started for months on end also blocked any other player from taking the record, especially now that they would have to play faster and less safe than JWL to beat his 243. Nobody wanted to play a very hard strategy after having to restart for untold hours. But luckily, in 2022, something would shake up the Black Ops 3 high round scene that put players on the road to pushing records much more easily. And this was the addition of patches to the rule set agreed upon by players. Patching is one of the longest and most intensely debated topics in the zombies community, and it refers to putting a script in the game to force it to give you the setup you need every time. There's a lot of arguments for both sides here. Those against it say you're changing an element of the game that was never meant to be changed, and you're removing the aspect of restarts, which is in itself part of the high round process. Those for it argue that with patches that mitigate hours or days of restarts, more players are motivated to play a map and push a record, and records actually get pushed and don't stagnate. But regardless of which side you agree more with, that last part is definitely true. Still, some games communities allow it while others frown upon it. For example, Black Ops 1 players don't allow any kind of patch because you can change other luck elements in the game. Black Ops 2 players allow a lot of different types of patches to fix or optimize the game, but again, not luck changing ones, and not on every map. And Black Ops 3 players were just deciding that setup patches should be allowed for all maps to make restarts less brutal, and it probably helped the most out of any map on Shang. Now, someone could just jump right into a game and make an attempt at the record using a harder strategy, without having to worry about losing days worth of restarts to a stupid down. They just needed a bit of motivation, and that's where I came in. In July of 2023, I hosted my third Zombies Wonder Championship, an annual gauntlet I've been doing that sort of functions as an online version of Zombies World Championship. One of the challenges for last year was Shangri-La High Round, for which using a patch was allowed, and beating the world record was encouraged. Sure enough, players who had been cooking on the map in the darkness for months stepped up. The most successful and skillful of these was Canadian Black Ops 3 expert GannonSnipes. Gannon had put a lot of time into round speedruns and strat testing the map, but now it was time for the real thing, especially since there was money on the line for the competition. Gannon patched the following things to set up. The first mystery box would give him baby gun and monkeys, the first 2 perks flipped would not be widows or deadshot, the pack-a-punch stone would not start in the tunnel, and the AAT you got on the Kuda would be deadwire, while the KN-44 would be turned. So you didn't have to worry about getting pushed down by the waterfall before you got the correct AATs. This made Shang by far the most patched setup on all of Black Ops 3, but it set Gannon on the path to completing the most skillful game for the record. At first, Gannon ran the same fast deadwire and turn strategy JWL had used in the beginning of his game, but Gannon's game would take a turn on 148 when he downed and lost his turned gun. He did not attempt flipping mule kickback as his patch locked the papstone to spawn, and it felt unlegit to abuse that when it would not be as realistic as an unpatched game. Instead, he played the next 59 hours of the game with deadwire only, but unlike JWL and Reviverz, he did not circle around the entire room while shooting deadwire, only the lower part near the waterfall and geyser, so he was able to proc deadwire on tighter hordes literally as soon as it was ready. This was a strategy that Vakla had come up with back in 2020, but no one had pulled it off this way in a real game until now. Gannon would take no downs for the rest of the game, relying on his baby gun shots and safety gums to save himself in sticky situations, and ended up flying past JWL's record and resetting on 248. And in case it wasn't obvious, he won that Zombies Wonder Championship challenge by a landslide. Gannon's game left Shang in an interesting place. By this point in 2023, every single other map had been 255'd. Shang was so close to 255, yet still so far. Gannon recognized that his game had not been perfect, and the record could still be improved upon. However, it seemed like it would be next to impossible to achieve it, as you would need the perfect game. You could never down and lose your mule kick weapon, and with the deadwire and turn strat, that just didn't seem feasible without years of practice. So for a while, Shang was left abandoned in the jungle, by all but one player. This was the scene when Snipercat set his eyes on his next challenge. He'd taken down Verrucht, he'd taken down Shino Numa, he'd even taken down the giant co-op. But, like I said, Shangri-La was a different beast entirely. Snipercat knew the speed he'd have to play at to achieve 255, 12.5 SPH or less to be exact, otherwise he'd reset beforehand, and the run would be for nothing. So he devised a plan to go where no zombie player had gone before, a fast game of deadwire and turned. But at first, he mixed things up a bit. He played with tunnel open and Kuda door closed, so he could take downs mid-game and still repack his lost mule kick weapon. The problem was that this advantage balanced itself out by making the strategy much harder, as the hordes don't come together nearly as cleanly, and the tunnel spawners make it about half an SPH slower. This was evidenced when he downed at the end of 172 and then died at the beginning of 173, ending his first major attempt. He'd set a new no gobblegum record for the map, but his work was clearly not over. Snipercat decided that while tunnel open was fast enough for 255 and would allow him to take multiple downs throughout the game, tunnel close made more sense as it was faster and not nearly as risky from horde up to horde up. Just days later, he jumped back into another game, his strategy reversed this time, and this time the jungle was no match for him. By round 140, he was already a few minutes faster than Gannon. This is because Snipercat was able to play at an average of 11 SPH for the entire game, even lower than his goal. How? Well, the main time save came from two elements. Snipercat ran the room slightly differently than anyone before him, choosing not to run a set loop next to the open door like Gannon had, but trailing up to the rock wall window at the back to get more kills faster if zombies were up there. The second was that he flipped almost every drop he got into an insta-kill with monkeys. Whereas the last few record holders except Gannon had avoided monkeys entirely by disabling the geyser, Snipercat enabled the geyser and welcomed the monkeys down with open arms. Normally players wouldn't think to use the monkeys much except for turning max ammos into extra perks, but since on Black Ops 3 they come for every drop, Snipercat was able to skillfully slay them just on time as they ran away with his drops, to land it on an insta-kill every time. As you might imagine, having all 4 drops of each round turn into times when he could just spray and pray at every spawn sped him up quite a bit. By 200, he was almost 4.5 hours faster than Gannon. He combined these 2 optimizations with a third for the real kicker, a playstyle he liked to call Get Good Idiot, where he simply didn't down, so he never had to reduce himself to using deadwire only. And the real twist? He didn't even use gobblegums, so not a single in plain sight or anywhere but here for the entire game, with most players thinking at the time that 255 could only be achieved within 30 minutes of reset with classic gums and using alchemical antithesis to speed up the game. Snipercat achieved it with 3 hours left before reset with no gums, checking the last unexplored Black Ops 3 round off his list.
Let's go.
So that completes the entire set. All 14 maps on Black Ops 3 can no longer be beaten numerically in solo. So what does this change for the Black Ops 3 community? Well, probably not much. BO3 maps have long been treated as a speedrun to 255 instead of achieving a higher round. Shang just took longer than any other map because of its proximity to reset. Does this mean we'll start seeing more speedruns of Shang? It's possible. Shang has proven itself as one of the most skillful maps to 255, which is precisely why it took so long. It had to, for players to refine their strategies and perfect what the map is asking of them. But I think everyone is glad to see this long journey finally come to an end. I'm Wonderful, and this is the most sane BO3 player. Thanks for watching.